Welcome to the Love Lab podcast, a safe place to get real about sex. Whether you're man, woman, single or couple, this is the show for you because, well, sex matters. We are your hosts, Kevin Anthony and Céline Remy.
All right, welcome back to the Love Lab podcast, and this is episode 76, and it's titled How to Have Multiple Orgasms. So, the subject that everybody wants more of, and not just the physical ones, but actually everybody wants more of this subject. This is a subject that comes up a lot. We just had people asking about it again this weekend. So I don't think we can have too many orgasms, and I don't think we can talk about orgasms too much either.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, we're considering doing a little orgasm series, so we'll see what our next show will be. But for today, we will focus on multiple orgasms, and we'll talk about it from the female perspective, the male perspective. We'll give you our how-tos. We'll give you like, hey, what are they? If you're like, no, that's not even possible, and what are they talking about? We're going to give you all of those nuts and bolts and details so that you'll feel very versed in orgasms and ready to come loud and clear multiple times. But before we get started, let's give a big shout out to our sponsor. If you are ready to join the secret club of men who are great in bed, meaning they also can have multiple orgasms, then check out Power and Mastery, which is the most complete sexual mastery training for men. You can find all about it at powerandmastery.com.
All right, orgasms.
Yes.
Who wants more?
You know, it's also interesting because I think that it is also part of the trap that in our society, we always want bigger, like more, bigger, better. And sometimes it can kind of become a trap that we are so focused on the result that we are not able to experience the adventure in itself. And that's definitely something that I wanted to bring into the discussion.
Well, yeah, that's an important point to make. And you know, I think what's also important, at least when we're speaking from the men's point of view, most men tend to think of orgasm as an ejaculation. And so if I say, who wants more of those? It's like, well, how many of them can you really have, right? Mm-hmm. So I think you need to let go of that idea. And we'll talk way more about that as the episode goes on. But realize that more orgasms doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be screaming the entire time or you're going to be ejaculating every time. More orgasms, better orgasms, multiples for sure. And we'll explain more and more about what that really means.
Yes. And so having a quick definition of an orgasm, I think for some people, they have a very narrow definition, which makes it difficult to enjoy the varieties of orgasmic sensations that can show up in the body. There's no limits to how orgasms can show up, and not all orgasms are earth-shattering, mind-blowing. Sometimes they can feel like a little ripple or a tingle or some warmth or a relaxation. Sometimes they feel like this overpowering thing that you can't even contain and you need to scream. Sometimes, it's so different. And for some, they only associate the word orgasm with very high level of arousal and really strong body signals. But if you are able to start to understand your body more and start to read what's going on, you can have an orgasms in many different ways. You can have hairgasms. Like I've had that. I brushed my hair. One day I was brushing my hair and looking at myself in the mirror, and I just was lost in the moment. And then I totally had this orgasm just from my brushing my hair. You can have nipplegasms. You can have cockgasms, right? I mean,
ever have a foodgasm?
Foodgasm, exactly. Even orgasms don't always have to be linked with a sexual activity. It could be having pleasure into doing something that you're doing, like eating, right?
Oh, and I think the key to that is once you've learned to cultivate and move the energy, sex isn't the only thing that can move the energy.
Absolutely.
Right? So if you've really learned how to do that, then you can technically have orgasms from all sorts of things. I mean, there's tons and tons of reports from women who have orgasms during yoga.
That's true. That's true. Meditation. Like you said, eating or brushing your hair, like so, taking a bath. So I think you got it. And I think we laid down the foundation for this episodes around orgasms. So what I would love to do is to take a dive into what are multiple orgasms and then what do they feel like.
Okay, that sounds like a good place to start.
So multiple orgasms, if we look at the definition, are really when someone can experience more than one orgasm during sexual activity most often, but it really doesn't have to be, right? And they can show up differently for different people because we are all unique in our ability to come. And that's something that's really important to remember, because if you read an erotica and you read the women like orgasming a certain way and you're like, I never do it this way and then something must be wrong with me, think again, because that's how she comes and it doesn't mean that's how you need to come. And things change too over time, especially as women, as we go through different phases of life, our hormones change, and also during our cycles, during the month, like things will feel differently in our bodies. I do tend to think that orgasm have a potential to become better as we age for us women, because we get a better understanding of our bodies and our energies and how things work and operate. So that's something to look forward to.
Well, I think they get better for men also.
Wow.
But I think for women, they tend to get better almost no matter what.
Okay.
As they get older, they get more comfortable with their bodies. They care less about what everybody thinks as they're looking at them. Mm-hmm. They're able to relax into their orgasms more. I think for men, they have to do a little bit of work. And this comes back to the separating orgasm from ejaculation part that we'll talk about a little later in the show. But most men, they learn how to masturbate and ejaculate very early in life, when they're children, basically. And a lot of times if they don't do anything to change that or to improve it or to get better at it, they're basically doing the same thing they've been doing their entire lives.
Yes.
So I think for men, they need to work at it a little bit, and learn how to cultivate energy and separate orgasm and ejaculation. But if you can do those things, then they keep getting better.
Ooh, so that sounds like it's better for both, which is awesome. Okay, so for some, I want to say like they will experience orgasms after orgasms, and there's like no breaks, and there's kind of like these peaks after peaks after peaks. And that's one definition of how multiple orgasms can show up. For others, it's more like there's an orgasm, there's kind of a little break or the energy coming back down, and then you go back higher, more like surfing waves, so they go up and down. And oftentimes there is often a build-up too in terms of the intensity, especially if you don't start too quickly, because then if you don't come too fast, but if you start to like start at a certain level and not push it, and then it keeps building up. I think the next level when it comes to multiple orgasms is to start to move this energy from being just a genital experience and become a full body experience. And that's really where I see the multiple orgasms becoming fucking amazing, because you start to be able to recharge your body with this sexual energy. You're not only just coming once and then feeling tired, you are starting to come over and over, and every time it's different in the body, and then it's your entire body that's turning into your genitals.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, and I would say, if you're a woman and you can have multiple orgasms, or you've learned how to have multiple orgasms, because you can all have them, then it doesn't really matter, in my opinion, if you come really fast. Just because you can just keep going. There's no refractory period. You don't have to worry about getting an erection. You can have a great orgasm, literally in the first 20 seconds, which, happens occasionally. But then you can just keep having more. You can keep building that energy more and more as you go. From the male point of view, you definitely don't want to do that right away, especially not if you haven't learned how to separate your orgasm and your ejaculation.
Absolutely.
But the point is actually the same for both, which is that you want to build the energy throughout the whole process. And this is one of the benefits we try to to talk to people about all the time. You know, when we tell them how long we make love for, and they're like, what? You know, or some people have said, why would you want to have sex for that long? And I'm like, wait, what? Why wouldn't you? But what I realized after having so many of those conversations is that people don't know what they don't know.
Yes.
Right? And what they don't know in this case is how much better the orgasms can be if you take the time to cultivate the energy. And here's the thing, as a guy, even if I ejaculate in after 10 minutes of intercourse, then I'll probably feel pretty depleted because I really haven't taken the time to build up the energy. But if we go 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, more than an hour, I don't feel any depletion at all. Why? Because I've taken the time to build that energy, build it, so that even when a lot of that energy gets released, there's still this reservoir of energy left where you're like, let's do it again. Sometimes, like, you know, you might be tired if it's in the evening and you're like, well, I'm going to go to bed. And I'm wired. I'm like, I can't sit still. I got to go do something because I have so much energy. I don't feel that exhaustion that happens when most guys ejaculate.
So I love that you brought this up about not having to like come really quickly for the first orgasm. And I think I'd love to jump into something here that I think the biggest mistake that people make is that they stop at their first orgasm. And they stop like emotionally, physically, like the whole thing is like it's an end. They see an orgasm as the end goal. And that's really what limits you in your ability to experience multiple orgasms, because you've set your mind on having one and that's it. Some people have orgasms, make those happen quickly, and very much focus on the clitoris or like on the shaft. And then they become ultra sensitive and they can't be touched anymore. And they're like, no, stay away, like nothing else can happen. And that's why they're like, I can't have multiple orgasms because I become too sensitive. And I think when that happens, it's because you've concentrated the energy too much on the spots you've been rubbing. And that makes it impossible to build up and achieve those states of full body pleasure because you've limited it to a little area of your body, which feels good, but I don't think it allows you to go to the places of multiple and also higher levels.
You know, it's so funny because I've heard many times from women that they're like, oh, no, one orgasm, that's it, and I'm done. And they're like, they say that they're happy to be done. And I never understood that. Because as a guy, like, we're used to that. Like, you know, for the most part, most guys, especially if you haven't learned all those things we've already mentioned, it's like one and out, you know? And come on, guy, how many of you haven't thought of like, oh, man, I wish, like, boom, I could just keep going. Right? Of course you have. When you were super young, you probably did 3, 4, 5 times. They were all about 3 minutes each. But the point is, from a male perspective, I always thought, man, if I could, why wouldn't I? And so I was always surprised to hear some women, not all women, but some women say like, no, we just have sex until I have an orgasm, whether or not, you know, he does blah, 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 and then we're out. And I'm like, wow, are you limiting yourself?
Absolutely. So I'd love to dive into, well, who can have multiple orgasms, right? And I think the way that I like to do it is give you the perspective, my perspective from the women's perspective, and then I would be really curious to hear Kevin's perspective for the male, for our male audience, because I think it's going to be a little bit different. So yes, both men and women we know can experience multiple orgasms. So that's done. Now you know, like, both of you can do it. Okay. Now, I think it is a little bit easier for women just because the way we are wired, we don't lose an erection or like have the ejaculation. It's easier for us to access those places of having multiple orgasms. Now, I don't know like I don't go into sex with the intention of having multiple orgasms. I tend to not be really goal oriented in my sexuality. Not to say that sometimes it doesn't happen. There are days where I'm like, this is it, I am going to come and this is how it's going to happen. But most of the time I keep an open mind. What I noticed is once I started to open up my mind to how does the orgasmic sensation, how do they want to show up today? What does it look like? The first time I experienced an orgasm was actually through penetration sex, and I didn't even know it was kind of happening. I had all these sensations in my body, and I was like, what is this? And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm having an orgasm. Oh, this is really cool. I found how to have orgasms from penetration sex before I figured out how to use my clitoris. So then for me it was very different because I never had the experience of the clit orgasm that got in the way of me experiencing penetration orgasm. I experienced penetration orgasms. I thought they were great, and I noticed they were very different from depending on the duration, depending on what point inside my vagina was stimulated. Like so many factors made it that it varied in their intensity. And then later, like about 5 years in, that's when I finally understood how to use my clit and had clit orgasms and was able to add that into my repertoire. Most people, I think, are stuck with their clit and they go, and that's how they know how to do it, and they're not open to the other sensations that come from penetration sex. So if you are open to the different ways that an orgasm can show up, and if you understand that it takes time for orgasmic energy to build up and you don't focus it so much into one spot, this is when you can have more than one orgasms if you have that open mind.
Yeah.
How about you, Kevin? How would you explain that for our male audience?
Well, the male experience is so different. It really is. You know, so from the male perspective, I mean, it's very rare that a guy doesn't know how to give himself an orgasm, right? Like it's really not that difficult. and most of us discover it really early on. So not really a problem. But where the problem does come in is the fact that you tend to have an orgasm so quickly that you never get to multiples, right? So, and that's because you haven't learned to separate your ejaculation from your orgasm. So for men, the key is how can you last long enough so that you can experience multiples? And then how can you separate the orgasm from the ejaculation? Because you can't have multiples really if you ejaculate when you orgasm. You can't. You could have an ejaculation and an orgasm, wait your 20, 30 minutes, depending on how quickly your body reacts, and then go again. But that's not technically multiple orgasms because the energy is not building from one to the next to the next. You're having one discrete event and then a break, and your energy comes all the way down. And then you have another discrete event, right? And then a break. So I wouldn't really classify that as multiple male orgasms. In order to really have multiple male orgasms, you have to separate the ejaculation from the orgasm so that you can then have smaller orgasm after smaller orgasm after smaller orgasm before or even if you get to the actual ejaculation. And one of the things I really want to make clear for men, if you haven't experienced this before, they're not going to be the same type of orgasms that you're used to when you have an ejaculation. Because you have an orgasm and you have an ejaculation that tend to happen at the same time. So you're used to that feeling. But you're not going to feel what the ejaculation feels like when you have what we would call a non-ejaculatory orgasm. So there's two parts that you might feel as a man when you have multiple orgasms. So the first one is that typical orgasm energy that kind of washes over your body. Like you just feel this energy like, whoa, yeah, right? So that's kind of the orgasm part. There's the energetic orgasm part. The second part is you may actually feel the contractions of the same muscles that you're used to when you ejaculate. The difference is, though, you're not actually shooting any ejaculate out. Nothing. There's no liquid coming out, but you might get little contractions,
spasms in your pelvic floor muscles, in your perineum,
exactly,
or around the prostate.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And they're typically, although they can be somewhat intense, they're typically less intense than they would be if you were physically ejaculating, because they're, when you're physically ejaculating, they're literally trying to pump ejaculate out as far and deep as possible. So, but the cool thing is that even though it may not be as intense, and you might be like, oh yeah, that was kind of cool, it was like kind of small, whatever. Over time, you can learn to grow them. Mm-hmm. And if you're having long lovemaking sessions, they will get stronger and stronger as you go.
By the way, I want to clarify what long is. I think anything, it has to be at least 20 minutes. And usually we're talking more into 40 to 45 minutes. That's where the long comes in. I just wanted to clarify it because it could be different for everyone, right?
Absolutely. And it's really important to state that because it is different for people. And we have to realize that our idea of long is pretty different than most people's idea of long. I mean, when you look at stats and they say that the average man only lasts, 5 to 7 minutes, that's on the high end. It's one study 3 to 5, the other one 5 to 7. Let's even round it off and say it's 10. Mm-hmm. Like 10 minutes, not really long enough to get into those multiple orgasm states. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you something else too that has to do with the time. Is that my ability to get to that multi-orgasmic state has a lot to do with where you're at.
Okay. Because
I feel your energy very deeply. Mm. Right? And every time you have an orgasm, it blasts through me like a bolt of lightning. Mm-hmm. And so the more orgasms you have, the more energy you're moving, the more it flows through me too. And, if you understand the microcosmic orbit and the circulation of energy between the male and the female, then you have some idea of what I mean by like it flows through me. Mm-hmm. But I feel that massive energy buildup that you have flowing through me too. Mm-hmm. And as long as I can control my ejaculation, I can then use that energy. And I can use that energy to move through me and actually trigger my own orgasms. And so we have learned, you and I, that in our lovemaking, it often takes 30 to 40 minutes for you to really get to that place of like those powerful, rolling orgasm.
Yeah, I want to say the first 20 minutes are all about distressing and getting out of my head and finally getting into my body. And finally I'm there, and it's about around the 20 minutes mark.
Right. So now think about that. we're giving the average man here, we're giving him 3 extra minutes by rounding to 10. Mm-hmm. You're still only halfway there. Yes. Halfway to getting to the place where she's just now de-stressed and relaxed. Mm-hmm. Relaxed enough to really be able to get into those deeper level orgasms. And so, if you're sitting there going, holy hell, 20 minutes is a long time, you got some work to do. And if you're thinking 40 minutes is an impossible goal, then you've got a lot of work to do. But just know, it is totally possible. Mm-hmm. We do it all the time. Mm-hmm. Lots of other people do it all the time. You just have to learn. And, we did an advertisement at the beginning of the show, as we always do, for the Power and Mastery series. But the Master Your Ejaculation product is going to teach you how to do that.
Well, sexual mastery will really take it to the next level.
Yeah, and of course, sexual mastery will take it to the next level. But if you really start with Master Your Ejaculation, so you learn how to separate the two and last a little longer, and then once you've kind of got that down, go into sexual mastery and take it to the next level. Like, yeah, if you're listening to this as a guy, or if you're a woman and you're listening to this and you're going, oh boy, I wish my man could do that, please go check that out. It's for your own good.
Absolutely. So I think this gave us a good idea about what they look like, that both men and women can experience that. Obviously, like the question is like, well, are they really pleasurable? Are they really that good? Is it worth, is it worth going and aiming for that? And I say absolutely. Multiple orgasms are highly pleasurable. There is a cumulative effect. Oh, and that's something I wanted to add too. Around, if you only have sex once or twice a month, it's going to be much harder to get to those places and have multiple orgasms and go to higher levels of pleasure. Because, what you don't you lose is kind of similar in sex. What I've noticed is when I have regular sex, it's easier for me to get into it quicker. It's easier to go to a higher state of pleasure. When we did our episodes on the 30-day sex challenge, when we did our 30 days in a row of sex, we saw a lot of different things, how we were staying like into a slightly aroused state from having the daily activity of the sexual intercourse. And so like this is really important to realize that you can't expect having multiple orgasms if you have very seldom sex.
That's true. We really did experience that, like the next day, it was like we were almost picking up where we left off the day before.
Yeah, so it's much easier to go to more or to higher levels if you're not like so depleted and can't remember the last time you had sex and what it felt like, right? And then I want to bring something into the equation in terms of having better orgasms and this idea here is, number one, you really want to celebrate every orgasmic sensation. So don't be snobby and be like, oh, this is not like mind-blowing, so I'm not going to count it as an orgasm. Like celebrate every sensations in the body, because you start to focus on that, and what you focus on expands. So that's really important. And the key to getting there is also by relaxing and chilling out. And which is counterintuitive. Most people are like, well, but like you're giving me what to do, not have to focus or work at it. And I'm like, no, actually drop that. Because when you approach it from that place of being slightly stressed like this, there's going to be cortisol level in your body. You're going to be in your like fight, flight, freeze mode of like cortisol, adrenaline, or things like this. Is so counterintuitive to having an orgasm. It really, when you have the cortisol in the body, it puts the body into survival mode. And it's basically next to impossible to have an orgasm when you're in survival mode.
Yeah, and another thing too is a lot of guys think and have been taught, and they read certain things about how they need to really tense their muscles up to control that orgasm. Mm-hmm. But as you know, and you've told our listeners and clients many, many, many times, is that tension equals ejaculation. And if you have too much tension squeezing in those muscles, it can actually trigger an ejaculation. So there's this fine line of like using the muscles to hold it back while also not over tensing and forcing yourself into an orgasm.
Wow. All right. So I'd love to dive into our how-tos and some tips to having multiple orgasms, to leave you with some action steps you can take right away, because we'd love for you to experience that. If you haven't yet experienced multiple orgasms, we'd love to have you take your orgasms to the next level. So we're going to give you a few tips here to get you started. Number one, you want to take your time and slow down and enjoy the buildup of sexual energy without trying to get anywhere. This is actually essential. This is why it's number one. It's because it's going to set the pace and the tone for what comes next, or who comes next. But if you don't want to go so fast that you go so high that then you crash and you're so tired that you can't go up again. You want to go slowly and build up, and that's how it's sustainable.
Absolutely. The next one is make sure you have toned pelvic floor muscles, and strengthening your muscles will lead to stronger orgasms. And we were just kind of talking about this. One thing that's interesting, I never really thought about it. I've never really felt any other than my own. But I know you working physically hands-on with men, you can often tell when their pelvic floor muscles are not developed.
Absolutely. So you want to think about your pelvic floor muscles as a trampoline. So you want to have resiliency. You want them to be bouncy. That means they can be like a little toned and not tight. This is why I'm saying toned, so there's like this tone to it, and flexible, so that there's this bounce that happens. And that works for both men and women. I know oftentimes they tend to think about the tight vagina or doing the Kegels for the women, but they are equally important independently of your gender. And the importance here is to focus both not only just on the contraction, but on the relaxation.
Yeah.
And I tend to see that more people have hypertonic muscles, which means that they are too tensed, versus hypotonic, versus like that they like not strong enough. That's most people will fall in the category of tensing too much and not knowing how to fully relax. And the intensity of the orgasms and the ability to go to higher level of pleasure comes from the ability to relax.
Yeah, the relaxation part is key. Mm-hmm. So, if you think of it like any other muscle in your body, when you grab it, you should feel like, oh, yeah, there's some muscle there. Mm-hmm. But it shouldn't be hard as a rock unless you're actually flexing
Engaging
it. Engaging it, exactly.
And when you relax it, it has to fully relax. And that's where people fall short most of the time. They're thinking they're relaxed, but they're not fully relaxed.
Well, and this is how people do Kegels the wrong way and then train their body the wrong way. Mm-hmm. So let's say you were working out in the gym and you were doing bicep curls, right? You wouldn't do a bicep curl, put the weight down, and continue to contract your muscles and hold them, right? You wouldn't do that, right? Eventually, your arm would become so stiff, you wouldn't be able to use it, right? So you would never do that. You flex it, you put the weights down, you relax it. It's the same thing when you're doing Kegels, and this is what a lot of people don't get. They focus only on the tensing part, and then they don't learn to completely relax it in between. And so what happens is over time, especially if they do them a lot, they literally develop a chronic tension.
Yeah, and then there's our lifestyles. With sitting all the time, we put a lot of pressure on our perineum, on our pelvic floor, and that usually will make it more tensed. So if you don't do counter things to offset that, then you tend to just walk around with a tight ass and tight perineum area and pelvic floor muscles.
Oh, that's no fun.
No, nobody likes tight ass.
Nobody wants to be a tight ass.
No. Number 3. Breathing is key to your orgasms. So conscious rhythmic breathing makes you come alive. The more you breathe, the more you feel. Most people will hold their breaths, will tense up, and that really is how they shortcome themselves, literally. You want to be able to have like belly breathing, rhythmic breathing. You want to feel this aliveness, because that's how it starts, and you need to be able to feel that in your body, and your breath is the foundation and is the key.
Yeah, and breath can also be used for the male to control ejaculation. And in Power Mastery, there are a couple of breathing techniques that we teach you in there that you can also use. So breath is very important to the whole process.
Now, if you are a woman, our next step probably will make a lot of sense, is that foreplay is your friend. And don't forget to stimulate multiple erogenous zones at the same time. Now, the multiple erogenous zone will work both for men and women, because oftentimes you're too focused on just the cock and you forget that there's a whole body, or just the pussy. For women, sometimes it's difficult to achieve those states of pleasure or orgasms. And if you start to combine multiple zones at once, it increases the pleasure, and it helps to spread the sensations throughout the entire body. So remember when we were talking at the beginning about the multiple orgasm, really that next level is to be able to have more than one orgasm, but then to turn your entire body into this throbbing, pulsing genitals. That's really how you get to that, is by moving away from the attention focused solely on your genitals and including your entire body.
Yeah, absolutely. And I certainly didn't intend for this episode to turn into a giant advertisement for Power and Mastery, but I do believe we have a free gift at powermastery.com for 11 erogenous zones, right?
Oh, yeah. We do have a free gift, whether you're in the Sex Vault. So just sign up in the Sex Vault or go to Power and Mastery. Either one will work. We do have a ebook that we put together. It's 11 erogenous zones.
Before you get to her pussy.
Exactly. So if you lack inspiration, grab this free book. Go to the Sex Vault and grab that book and read it and then apply it.
Yeah. Especially if you're a guy.
Yes.
Because there's probably a bunch on there that you rarely ever touch or don't even really pay any attention to.
Yeah, and that's where you want to go before you go to her pussy. So it's very important.
We did talk about that. I don't know if it was last episode, but we did talk about that very recently in one of our previous episodes about, for the man, you want to get to him through the genitals, starting with the genitals and then working up. Whereas a woman, it's completely opposite. Mm-hmm. You want to start more at the heart level, the connection level, other parts of the body before, and then you work your way down. So.
Absolutely. And our last tips here for you are really just don't limit your pleasure, okay? Don't put yourself in such a box that you can't explore more of what your pleasure could look like, and give yourself permission to be vocal. It is so important. If you let your mouth open, and I really don't care, it's really hard to hear her moan, it's really hard to hear him moan, give yourself permission to be more vocal. That will help the energy to circulate. And then especially for women's here is move your hips and bodies in a way that feel good. Because if you tend to be too stiff or try to want to lock into a position to get to an orgasm, the more you focus like this, the less you're going to get to that result, right? So let your body really come into that aliveness. And then I think the last point, which is the most important, is that believe that you too can have multiple orgasms. That means that if you're a guy and you're listening, believe that you can separate your ejaculation from your orgasms. Believe that it is possible. That's the first step to know that you can. And we hope that through this episode, we've given you enough to be okay, I know it's possible. I know what to do. And that going to powerandmastery.com to check out the courses will help you get there if you don't know yet how to do it.
Yeah. And don't worry, I don't know if any of you listening have seen, there's an old, I think it's an old Mad TV episode or something, and there's a guy teaching about Tantra and how he's in a perpetual state of orgasm, and he's he's having orgasms constantly, he's trying to write his name on the board and he can't even write because he's constantly having orgasms. Don't worry, that's not real. It's not going to happen to you if you learn how to have multiple orgasms. So don't worry about it. Don't have any fears. Try it. You'll like it.
Most likely.
All right, everybody, that's all the time we have for this episode, and we will see you next week. We hope you liked this episode of the Love Lab podcast. If you enjoyed this show, leave a comment and share it with your friends.
And if you want more, we have an entire digital library with the best sex tips and relationship advice at CelineRemy.com. That's CelineRemy.com. So join us in the Sex Vault to continue this adventure.
Thanks for listening.
And remember, you're amazing.